Good evening. Welcome to the PoliticIt podcast. Tonight we have Alena Ericksen, and it's great for you to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
And you're candidate for the House.
Yes.
Which district is it?
District 18.
District 18, and that's actually a new district, isn't it? Someone chose not to run again, right?
Yes. Timothy Hawks. He chose not to run again after 8 years. So there were 4 of us in the race, and it was a good experience.
And now there's 2.
Yeah.
So you have a primary.
I do.
That you're going to go through. So what was it like visiting with delegates and stuff? What did you learn?
Well, the delegates are interesting because they are the ones that are doing the research. They care about the issues. They want to be engaged. They want to be involved. And so it was just natural to have those conversations with them and say, what concerns do you have? Chances are I've probably worked on it with my work the last few years in the state. And so it was a fantastic experience. I loved making the connection. People asked me, are you really that real? Like, is this the real you? And I'm like, yeah, this is me. I'm just genuine. I care about people. I care about the state, this country, and that's why I do what I do.
So what got you started? What was the spark?
It was 2020. I just felt like, whoa, there's some overreach going on, and I was concerned. I was concerned with businesses being reduced to capacity. I was concerned with the amount of fear that people were experiencing and the disruption of peace. I was concerned with what I was seeing the children go through, my own children, the isolation. And I felt like we need to address this, or this is going to be a mess later on.
Here in Weber County, I was helping one of our school board candidates because I'm really concerned about that issue. And what surprised me going through the convention process was that we would have town hall meetings. I'd go to listen, mainly, and we'd have 35 to 40 people show up for a delegate meeting just for him. And I thought that was kind of interesting because normally that many people don't show up for a House race.
Yeah.
In fact, some of the Senate things that I went to weren't any bigger than that. And it told me that that's on people's mind. Did you find that, talking to delegates, that education was a big issue?
Well, education, but just being involved. People are like, I'm really concerned. I've never been involved. I'm not into politics, but I felt like I needed to come and step it up. And what I love about that is that that is the essence of our republic. It is a government of and by and for the people. When the people, regular people, get involved in their communities and they express their concerns, that is what makes the state so great. And so I love that rawness, that candidness of being able to come in and say, you know what, I'm just concerned, because that's how we all begin. Everybody has a day one.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something that sparks you to say, I want to be involved.
Yeah.
And you were in the congressional race to start with.
I was.
What motivated you to drop out of that and sign up for the legislature?
Well, I'll start with what motivated me to run for congressional. I feel like I have a pretty good pulse over the entire state. I have connections all over with different organizations and grassroots efforts. And so for me, I was like, I think I know the state, the whole entire state, at a more intimate level. And I felt like, now's the year to run. I don't think people have had this much patriotic fervor as they've had before. And so for me, just being able to run and represent the people and who I am and what I've done and the work I've done, I just thought, let's just see what happens. The reason I decided to get out was because I was watching the race very closely. And I am concerned that Republicans keep making the same mistakes. We keep dividing the vote.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to divide the vote. And I felt like I had to look at the other candidate and say, is this individual more qualified on a federal scene, on a federal conversation with experience than me? Yes, I know the state better, but maybe this individual knows the federal issues better. And for me, I thought, let's do a win-win. You take this, I'll go somewhere else, and this doesn't need to be a competition.
So why the legislature?
Well, the legislature, it has never been a personal motivation, a personal drive. It has never been something that I've said, I want to do this one day. it feels like the next step. I've been at the Capitol several times. We've seen each other several
Right.
times over the last few years. And just being involved with the entire state, the concerns, it felt like the natural next step.
That's good. I tell you, in the House, we have a wonderful group of women in the legislature that are actually, I think, some of the most powerful legislators we have. And I bet they'd just enjoy having you,
Thank you.
join their group, because they are pretty fabulous, I say.
Well,
You know?
that's great. I think
Yeah.
you've been fantastic.
Yeah.
You've been a real champion for education. And that is one of my platforms too, because I think if we're going to fix the future, we have to address what's happening to our children.
Well, it's interesting. We actually put together not really a slate, but a number of people that we thought would help us move in the right direction. And fortunately, through the caucus and the convention system, every one of the candidates that we and others recruited are now looking to take those seats.
That's fantastic.
I really believe that this is our year to take back the school board in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were talking to individuals, delegates that were out there, what were their primary concerns with education?
CRT and SEL.
It's interesting,
Yeah.
isn't it? And
Yeah.
I found that pretty surprising, because I did attend a number of these meetings with different school board members, and that actually is a real concern. And when you read the press in the state and you listen to the current school board and you listen to the talking heads, they say, well, that doesn't exist in Utah, right? And especially CRT, right? We don't teach critical race theory, but what were people saying to you about?
I think they just want to make sure that isn't coming in. I think an important healthy dialogue is to understand the pressure that teachers are under, and we need to reduce that pressure. Even with SEL, I think it's really important our kids, and I am seeing this as a professional mental counselor, our children are under a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, depression, and unfortunately suicide ideation. And so SEL, or social emotional learning, just emotional, is like a top topic for a lot of people, because we need to address what's going on with our mental health and our children.
So being a professional in that field, how do you feel about turning that over to teachers that have never been trained as mental health?
What's interesting to me is this seems pretty obvious. I would never take into my office a class full of kids and say, okay, I'm going to teach you, geography or mathematics and help you work towards your college or your high school degree. I'm not qualified. I'm not educated in that. And I think there's a difference between psychological evaluations in the assessments versus teaching children to maybe breathe.
Yeah.
I think that would be appropriate. Okay, if you guys are feeling anxious, take some deep breaths.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a basic thing I think teachers can give, but they don't have to be qualified for.
Right.
But as far as children
and especially recognizing maybe children that have problems, right, that we could get some
Right.
mental health
right.
things for. But yeah,
Well,
and
yeah.
the other thing is too, as I read about SEL, CRT, this is something that's been concerning to me. I see it more as, tribalism and trying to divide people.
Yeah.
And that scares me a little bit. I don't think parents in Utah really want the values and the outlook to be programmed by another party.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and especially
virtue is something for parents to.
Yes. I agree with that, because initially they took virtue or they took morals or religion. They took it out of the schools because they felt like that was something to be taught at home, and yet we're trying to bring it back in a totally different light. I feel like even the pornography, that's a hot topic right now, and we've talked about that just previously with Davis County. To me, we need to understand what's happening now from a professional perspective. When we take addiction, okay, pornography is very addictive, and we take a minor, a child, and we introduce that or make that available to a child. What I see is a kind of a storm of the perfect storm, where we've taken children previously and isolated them in the sense of COVID, right? They were isolated for a while. Now they're isolated because they're on electronics so much. It's not so much face-to-face interaction anymore. What we do know about addictions, there was a study done in 2000 in Portugal. Portugal had 1% of the population addicted to heroin. And so Portugal did something that people hadn't done before. They said, you know what, we're going to stop criminalizing it like America is, and punishing people and then holding them away from human connection. We're going to actually start integrating people back into society. And what they have found is every form of addictions had reduced. So the essence of addiction really is human connection. Now, likewise, in the early 20th century, they did Professor Alexander. He did a study, they did studies, I think Professor Alexander might have been in the 70s. And he followed through with the studies they did with rats. They wanted to see what rats would do with 2 water options, one laced with drugs and the other just regular. Well, the rats that were in an isolated container, they took so much drugged water that they actually killed themselves. But then in the 70s, Professor Alexander said, wait a minute, this is not an ideal rat environment. Let's just make what we're going to call a rat park. And so they filled it with the toys, they filled it with cheese, other rats. It was just this perfect rat haven. And you know what ended up happening is the 2 water options were available, but the rats very rarely went to the drug-laced water. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the essence of addiction? Is it human-to-human connection, bonding that so many of us need and want? And so what I'm seeing with our children is the need for that human connection. And we have to understand that, especially with the technology where they're so ingrained into, their work with computers, and it's not as much human connection, where we have taken children, and I am seeing children, even today, there's barely a day that goes by that I don't hear how children are impacted by COVID and the fears that they could not psychologically handle at such a young age. And so what we're seeing is these kids that have fears, these kids that are isolated, these kids that were taught to isolate, and now we're going to have porn available in the schools.
Yeah.
That is a huge problem for the developmental aspect of children.
Well, and it actually really worries me because for one, in the legislature, we actually had a resolution that stated that pornography was a mental health crisis.
Yep.
Right, and I believe that. I believe that's true. What surprises me with that, we just passed that legislation this year. Thanks to Brooke Stevens and her, and there were a lot of people that were involved in that, right? But her tenacity with Laverne in the library and really pushing that issue and getting other people involved, other people from the parents groups, and we passed the legislation. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to be interesting to see what impact that actually has. I know there's a number of people that are fighting and pushing back against it, and let's just hope that cooler heads prevail and we end up actually making an impact with that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So did you? What other things, when you visited delegates, did you see that made you feel like you were the right person for this?
They are very concerned about the federal overreach. I took on a project. In the fall, the federal government had, obviously the vaccine mandate for federal employees was a big concern. And for me, I want choice. I want people to be able to choose what's best for them. And I want, industries to be able to produce products in a free market that people can say, hey, I'm going to go do what I need and do what's best for me and my family. But what I saw was individuals who were close to retirement that for whatever reason, their doctors had advised them not to get the vaccine because of previous allergies, health conditions, or pregnancy. Something was going on. And yet they were about ready to lose their job. And I don't agree with the sentiment, well, you can just go get another job. These individuals were in an invested position to not just start over somewhere else or just so easily pick up something. So I had a reputation for helping people with affidavits. And there was a few techniques or tactics that we worked on. And number one, breach of contract, when you look at the employment contract, if you didn't sign to have your employer mandate those specific things, then that's a breach of contract. For them to change the terms of the agreement of employment and to say you can't work here anymore unless.
And so you found that successful?
I did. There, I think a lot of people found some relief and were able to communicate with their employers. I think there's always power in numbers as well. That's always seems to be the answer, and you probably know that.
So what other topics came up a lot?
Just individual rights. I think people just want to be able to live life, pursue happiness. I think they are ready for some new things. I think the new thing that's starting to shift is now people are worried about water. People are worried about high density. They're worried about inflation, gas prices, all of these things that we need to really strategize and think about as a state. What can we do to be self-reliant? What can we do to not rely on the federal government and the strings attached? I just think that boils down to our state, it has the motto of industry and thrift. And I love that.
Yeah.
Because if we can put our minds together, I believe the people can solve the problems better than the government can. I believe the people can make a dollar go further than the government can. And so I want to put the power back into the people as a true representative that helps them live life to the fullest. And I feel like that message really resonated with people at this time.
Well, one of the advantages, I think, to the caucus convention system is that you actually have to go out and talk to real people.
Yeah.
Right? You don't just strategize in the back room and have focus groups to look at what the exact right message is to put forward, right? What are your 60-second sound bites? You actually have to convince these people that you're going to represent them.
Here's the number one thing that came to me. People said, people have a BS monitor, and they said, you pass it.
Oh.
That I don't, I'm just genuine. I'm real. And when there's not a personal agenda, when there's not some, when I'm just here humbly to serve the people, to represent them, people feel that. I will say I love the caucus system. SB 54 needs to be repealed. We need an amendment or something there.
It's funny. Some of the long-term members of the legislature seem to think that the caucus is just full of right-wing radical people, and that they don't stand a chance if they're not out on the fringe. Did you find that with people?
It's so sad, because what I have found in politics is I want to get along. It's really important to me. We can't accomplish things if we're just fighting and putting all of our energy in between fighting. When I've worked across the state with grassroots people, there are people that have had diverse opinions and feelings, and yet I've come together with them and we've created solutions. What's the problem? Hey guys, let's show up to the Capitol. This is a common ground. Let's speak respectfully to legislators. Let's have conversations. Let's influence policy. I think people are tired of the fighting and they want some productivity. And that's the essence. I think name calling, let's just stop. The more that I have seen things, the more I realize we never really grew up from kindergarten, some of us.
Yeah.
We need to.
Well, I noticed being in the legislature, being in the Senate, that the parents groups that we have today are absolutely fabulous.
Yeah.
Because they're passionate about the issues. They understand exactly what they are. They understand what the law is. They've actually done their homework. Mm-hmm. And they can come, and instead of being confrontational, mm-hmm. they've been nice.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, do you remember when we first met?
I don't remember.
It was a hearing, and you called me a pom.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, yeah. You said, so are you guys now the poms?
Pissed off mama.
Pissed off mama.
I shouldn't. Yeah.
Maybe you want to edit that.
Yeah, no, but that's right. I remember that now. And there has been an awakening. I mean, we sometimes say that Mama Bear has woken up. And the worst thing you can do to a mama bear is something that affects their children.
It's true.
Right?
Well, don't you think, though, that when you talk about fringe, to me, that's such a name. I have an inner commitment to treat everybody with respect. I've been in the presence of former governors. I've been in the presence of attorney generals. I've been in, the presence of legislature, all the way down to what people are calling fringe. And you know what? Everybody has equal value to me.
Yeah.
And everybody has a right to be there and has a place. I don't agree all the time with the delivery, but I think on both spectrums, whether it's the legislature or the people coming to be heard, we need to foster respect across the aisle in our communications.
You know,
That's
I
important.
found I was chairing the committee when the group from Dixie came up to try to persuade the legislature not to take away the name Dixie, Dixie State University. And I turned to the co-chair of the committee and I said, you know what, today every one of these people is going to speak. You know, and you know, there were so many of them, we had to, I think we limited it to 2.5 minutes, right? Kind of calculated how many hours we would be there for doing that. But every one of the people that came spoke, that wanted to speak, right? What I found is, you know, we simply said, hey, if somebody else has already made your point, you don't need to get up and repeat it unless you have something to add to the conversation. But it was strange to me because over the next week and a half, I got so many letters from people who simply said, thanks for listening to me. It didn't come out the way I wanted it to, but at least I felt like someone was listening to.
I've loved that. There was, you know, most of the delegates and even the people when I've been walking the neighborhoods and having conversations, I find most people agree with my stance because I'm pretty respectful. My responsibility as a rep, any responsibility as a rep, it is not to enforce our opinions on somebody else. It's to protect the rights of the individual. It doesn't matter if they're on the left, the middle, or the right. There's two responsibilities. It's to honor the oath that you take to protect the Constitution and to protect individual rights. And I think every bill that comes needs to be checked with legislation. But what I find really interesting is when we talk about the platform of the Republican Party, that in essence is the very values that envelop what a Republican is. And it's okay if you don't like those values. Find a party with the values that you have. But to me, why would you call somebody a name for being a part of a party that they choose to align with those values?
Right.
And so
you know, in most of those, if you look back, most of those tenets, you know, the platform really came from the Reagan era. And, you know, it's actually insulting for me to say that I'm a right-wing fringe member of the legislature when I feel like I'm just trying to align with the principles that Reagan talked about.
When they start calling you names, they don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, when we start resorting to that, it's not only childish, it's inappropriate, and it doesn't do anything. It doesn't foster unity or productivity. I do want to mention the one thing about caucus, because with my experience, it was unique, it was genuine, and it was sincere. And so when I went into caucus, I didn't know anybody in my precinct. Actually, Timothy Hawks was in my precinct, so I guess I could say, but we had never formally met. Yeah. I had written him several times, but never heard back, so we never had a conversation. But I went in there, I was already a candidate. I did not become a delegate, and I did not ask anybody to become a delegate for me. And I thought, I'm just going to test my message. I'm going to offer myself, and I'm going to see what happens.
Yeah.
In that four-way race, I was the only one that did that. And you know what? Somehow I still got almost 50% of the vote.
The first round.
The first round. So I was the winner of that convention. And unfortunately, we had ranked choice, and it kind of skewed some of the numbers. I only went up just a little bit more, so consistently I was on the top. But, you know, I sat there before going on stage, and I just kind of said a prayer in my heart, and I just said, you know what, I'm here to serve. You know, give me the words that I need. And it happened. I was told what to say. And I referenced, you know, the idea that John F. Kennedy, you know, ask not what your government can do for you or your country, but what you can do for your country. And the audience loved that because that is what I've done. You know, I thought, what can I do to contribute? And everything I've done for the state, which is so many various things that I've been a part of, it's been because I have cared, because I felt the prompting to, and okay, let's see what we can do to affect positive change.
Very good. Hey, we're talking to Alena Ericksen. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Well, I started out as a young mom, against all odds, and I had 6 children, 8 and under, and yet I worked really hard with my husband. We've been married for 25 years. My first children are 3 girls and then 3 boys, and it's been a fun journey. I'm almost an empty nester. But as my husband has had a career that took us out of Utah for about 10 years, I've been able to live across the country. We've lived in Las Vegas, we've lived in Arizona, we've lived in Indiana. And Indiana was a lot of fun because we had a family homestead where we had a few milking cows and chickens, and we had an orchard garden. We taught our children to work. And as we were mobile, we had to be kind of a homeschooling family. I've done a little bit of everything from private school to charters and a little bit of public, and now to trade schools for my last sons at home. I gained a love and a reverence for our country, for the founding fathers, for what it took for our founding fathers to implement the principles and the policies that they did in our Constitution. And I recognized very quickly the proper role of government and our duty to preserve that. And so for me, family is the core center unit of society. We need to support families. And furthermore, as a professional mental counselor, I look at what's happening in families as they come into my office every day, and I'm having those conversations. And I'm seeing how overreaching policies are impacting families and individuals. And so with all the work that I've done for the state, with my love for the country, my belief in family, and my commitment to my God, I believe that this is a calling that I can do and that I can represent the people of this district.
I am Alena Ericksen, and I'm running for House of Representatives, District 18.
Welcome back. We're talking to Alena Ericksen, candidate for the state house. I think that's marvelous. So what's your plan of attack for winning this election?
It's to, again, be genuine, connect with the people. I have loved the conversations I've had with even those that would call themselves moderate. And they say, well, I wouldn't vote for you because, yeah, and that doesn't happen very often. But to me, I took the time with the delegate, an extra hour on the phone, that said, it's okay if you don't vote for me. I'm okay with that. Because again, I'm just in this to help. You know, it's not like I have this personal incentive or something like that. So it was very natural for me to just transition to that and just listen.
Well, it's good. It's good. I was kind of excited when you were coming on the podcast because we saw a lot of you down at the Capitol.
Yeah.
And you've been quite involved in advocating for parents and children, and I think that's great. What specific things I think do you have to project to people? What's the message that's going to get you elected?
I think people want, and this is really actually interesting as a woman to campaign at this time of season, because people, I think, want a fighter, but they don't want contention. They want somebody who knows how to stand firm, to stand on principle, to protect their individual rights. And to me, I feel like I can do that. I know I can do that. I know I can stand on principle, and I have done that the entire 2 years. And people who have followed me, they know that about me. They know that I have not moved from standing on what principle is. It is eternal truth. And so for me, just coming along and representing the people, helping them feel the authentic me, and recognizing that there's a bigger plan from the guy upstairs.
Yeah.
And I trust that. So.
And you're gonna fight for what you believe is true, right?
Yeah, I think our kids have had the biggest hit over the last few years, and they need to be protected. We've talked a little bit about that. I believe that federal overreach is becoming a problem. We need, as a legislature, we need to come together and say, you don't have jurisdiction here. I think we need to start looking at ideas of ways we can protect our state. We have a pretty good economy.
Yeah.
I feel like the legislature's done really well. We've balanced the budget. Things look pretty good there. But what can we do to create more industry or thrift here so that we're more self-reliant? I'm interested in self-reliance so that we're not shipping food all across if that becomes an issue. How can we feed our people?
Right.
What water concerns do we have that we can create innovation to create solutions? Because all across the state, people are worried about drought.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think the point you hit on to begin with, the idea that there actually is some truth. There's this big debate now where where people talk about their truth or your truth or his truth, and it actually bothers me.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we as a state want to be nice, right? But sometimes we take niceness to a limit where we're forgetting about the things that we hold dear.
Yes. Yeah, you can be kind and you can stand on your principles. You don't have to, we can disagree professionally and be a voice for reason professionally. I can look at somebody, and I do this all the time in my office. Somebody might come in with completely different values or goals than me, but I see them, I hear them, I acknowledge that that is the path they are on. It doesn't have to be my path, but I recognize that they're on a separate individual journey. But there is one eternal truth. There really is. It's not my truth. It might be my opinion. It might be my feelings, but truth is truth.
Yeah, it's interesting that our legal system today. I mean, if we go back to the Declaration, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, these are natural laws. Mm-hmm. that aren't granted by government, they're granted by God, and that's the American experience, right? That's what distinguishes us. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite books is, which is actually a little bit boring, but Alexis de Tocqueville and Democracy in America. And one of the things that this French aristocrat found out is that we're not beholden to government here; we're beholden to God. Yeah. And so when you said that, it just triggered those emotions in me, because I think, personally, we can stand for truth without persecuting other people.
Well, Frederick Bastiat, The Law. Yeah. If you read that, it really puts into perspective what the role of government is. Yeah. It is to protect life and property. And what is life, or what is property? Life was given to man, not by government, but by God. And what is property? It is the execution of that life. It is the creation that man comes up with to create his possessions, his destiny, his, role. And you can do what you want so long as you don't impact others, which to me, pro-life. Do you realize that 3,000 abortions are happening every year in Utah?
Yeah, what'd you think about that leak out of the Supreme Court?
It's up to the states. I'm fine with that. But I believe Utah needs to be doing better. I always want to be empathetic towards mothers who are in hard circumstances. If it's affecting legitimately the life of the mother, then we need to explore that. Of course, her life needs to be preserved. But in cases of rape, incest, or affecting the life of the mother, that's only 2 cases out of 3,000.
Right.
I would honestly like to know why there hasn't been a pro-life bill in 2 years heard on the committee floor. I would like to understand that, because if we were to line up 3,000 children, or 2,998, and say these children are going to be exterminated, what would the public outreach be on that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know why that particular decision was leaked. There's some debate over who did, which side really decided to do that. But it honestly, to me, when I heard it, I thought it actually gave me a lot of hope.
Yeah.
That we might get back to a value-based society.
Well, and organizations like ProLife Utah, I love what they do, because they take those mothers who are scared, who don't feel supported, and they give them options. They sit outside of those clinics and they say, let's hear the baby's heartbeat. Before you go in, before you make any decisions, know that we're here to support you. And I believe that the private market, the industry, and a free market of, the private sector can come out and address and help those women better than government can. So to me, I love the idea of allowing those organizations to do what they do best.
Yeah. It's interesting. It really should be an issue given where the Supreme Court is, because it ultimately will come back to this becomes a state issue, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's something that people have to consider when they're picking candidates to represent them.
One thing I want to ask you about is the surplus bills that come through every year. How do you feel about that as a legislator?
Of which bills?
Just surplus. There's like this last session, wasn't there almost 1,200 or around 1,000?
Well, my first year, I actually voted against almost every bill that came across my desk, and I found that doesn't play that well with your colleagues. But when they asked me why I voted against it, I said I just have a fundamental disagreement that's a role of government.
Yeah.
Right. And when I went in, people said it's a lot harder to vote yes. And you know what? I think that's completely false. It's a lot harder to vote no. And it comes back to my intern this year. She called me on the phone and we were talking, and she said, "What do you want me to do before the session starts?" I said, "There's a book called The Law by Bastiat." Okay. And I say, "I want you to read that." And I had a conversation with her before that, understanding that she may not have ever read that book before. And so when she came back, she goes, "What am I supposed to think about that?" I said, "I just want you to understand that a lot of times that's why I vote the way I do." Mm-hmm. And it was funny because one bill came before the Senate, and I didn't really think it was a proper role of government, but I voted that way anyway. I voted yes. I should have voted no, I think, but it was funny though. She came up to me right as soon as the session was over. She goes, "That vote surprised me." And there were reasons why I voted the way I did, but I think that's a good guide. Mm-hmm. And we don't need 400 and something new laws every year.
No, I'm concerned about the micromanagement. I feel like if we're going to do laws, it's going to repeal bad ones, right? Yeah. We need to just say, okay, this isn't the role of government. Let's kind of loosen these things and put the power back into the people. I think that's what people are ready for. I understand that there are some bills that if you don't pass, worse things can happen. And so I don't want to be so rigid in there that I'm not, workable. I think everything needs to be individually evaluated, because we are maybe in a sense a tangled mess after all these years of just over legislation. And I think SB 195, the emergency health orders, that was such a hot bill. And I was so active about and active with. I actually helped influence a lot of the amendments that came in. I'm just working with legislators on that. And that bill is huge. It's massive. It needs to be simplified, and so that's one to look at. I think people are ready for term limits. I think term limits are a good thing, because then it doesn't become a career, it becomes public service. I know from community Christian service that I do that I can give my talents and my strengths, but then it's best after so long to give that to somebody else who brings a whole new perspective. And has a fresh perspective. Yes.
About it. Has a better connection with the people at that point.
Yeah. I think you can become so tight as a legislature that you might possibly run the risk of becoming removed from your constituents. Yeah. So for me, I'm extremely connected to the community. I have good working relationships with the legislature over the last few years, but I also have that connection to the community. If I don't go back into the community, then I lose that sight. I could risk losing that sight. And I think every one of us can fall prey to that. So to me, term limits is important. To go in, give your best, do your service, and then gracefully bow out and let somebody else come in and have their best to offer.
I thought Mike Lee's response on that, they said, "You went in as a term limit person. Why don't you just term limit yourself?" And he basically said there's certain values that I want to communicate, but he said, I'm not just going to bow out, but I would like everybody to bow out.
Yes,
right?
That was his position. This needs to be the same for everybody. We need to have the same condition for everybody, which again, SB 54. If some people are getting signatures, how is that fair in our caucus?
It seems weird, like with Mike Lee, gets over 70% of the vote. at the convention. He's got 2 people running against him that barely don't even get 10%.
And
right?
I can,
it almost seems weird that now they have equal footing on the ballot, right? It's just
yes. I personally think definitely that needs to be amendment on the bill. That if you hit less than 10% in signatures, you can't be on it.
Yeah.
You can't be on the ballot because honestly, I mean, some of these candidates are getting 9, 5, 10%. You know, at that point, are you going to get funding?
Yeah.
At that point, are you going to make a difference?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, and that's actually how I got involved to begin with in politics, was working with Keep My Voice people to try to defeat SB 54, and you know, there's still hope, I think.
Yeah.
Of getting back to there.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a great discussion.
Yes.
We're out of time. Why don't you kind of give a little bit of a pitch? You know, look over in there and give them a message that makes people want to vote for you.
Well, I am here. I have always been here. I don't have to deliver a platform of empty promises. I have been here serving the state because I care, because I genuinely want to make things better, and I want to help my neighbor. And so with that, with the vast array of things I've been involved with the concerns the Utahns have had the most, I want to bring that experience and represent you. I want to be able to hold town halls and say, these are the bills coming up. These are the things I'm in support of, and these are the things I'm concerned about. What are your thoughts? Here is how you can get involved and engaged. And I believe that together we can restore the Constitution. I believe together we can create the district and the state that we want. We can't be so concerned about the federal government. It gets way too much attention, but we can make a difference in our state. It has always been we the people. When we come together, we work together, and that is what my vision is to hear you, to listen to you, and to work with you.
Perfect. Thank you, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.